Hello. Hello and welcome to a beautiful Tuesday night here in Miami. Oh, Data Republican. Awesome. I've been meaning all week to amplify more of what you've been publishing on the Ned Journal, Data Republican, because I've been saying for like a year and a half now, maybe 2 years, that journal is one of my magician tricks. I think I said that on the first Rogan hit and PBD, and there are a couple of these tricks that you can mine to see what the CIA is about to do next. And the Ned Journal is one of them, and it's just an incredible resource. And there's so many things in there, so many lines of effort in terms of pulling its extensive history for all the different topics that we encounter today, whether that's the blob's war on populism, whether it's free speech issues, whether it's what's happening in the energy sphere, whether it's what's happening in military, whether it's what's happening with trade policy. Yeah, it's public, water baby. Not only is it public, you pay for it. And we've gone over a couple other of these magician tricks, like the CIA World Fact Book. And I don't know if see, the problem is when I talk about a lot of these, they shut down. So I need to be careful about revealing all my little secrets, because sometimes they blow up and go viral, and then everyone starts mining it, and then they kill the resource tool because it's getting them in all this trouble. And then the Wayback Machine is imperfect, very imperfect. There's certain documents that don't load in the Wayback Machine. You can ask the Wayback Machine with certain predicates to actually not archive you in the Wayback Machine, like famously Taylor Lorenz. Folks may remember Taylor Lorenz. Like everything about her in the Wayback Machine is like, or her Twitter account, I think you couldn't even see her old tweets because she applied to have that purged. I've seen that happen with several of these institutions. Also, the Wayback Machine does not load videos. And so if you delete a video archive, that can be unrecoverable. So in due time. Generally, when I feel like I've sufficiently archived something is when I'll start talking about it publicly. Because I've just seen this. I mean, how many? Probably a dozen and a half things have we done just on these streams. And then it ends up getting popularized and then purged. So, but Data Republican, I think you're doing a heroic and necessary effort there on, and just so everyone can see what we're talking about here, because I don't know if we've got new subs in here or anything, but this is the Ned Journal of Democracy, right? This is the CIA's in-house journal. And we've gone over a bunch of insane things from here. Famously went over the Poland Ned plan for transitional justice to arrest the party that was just in power with their Justice Department. I talked about that extensively on Joe Rogan, and then when I was at CPAC, a Polish delegation came up to me and said, "My God, thank you so much for doing that. We had no idea about any of this." I talked about a couple of other of these articles involving Latin America. I had some other delegations come up on it. One of my favorites, because we're going to get into, I'll circle back to this as we move into today's world tour of the news and then into the main topics. But a lot of this is you're going to see the role of drugs play a significant role in this administration. I think it's part of the Ed Martin story. I think it's a huge part of the Pakistan story with what's happening with India right now. It's a huge part of the Mexico story. It's a huge part of the Brazil story. It's a huge part of the Ukraine story. It's a huge part of the crypto story. And you guys know, where I am on that in terms of, USAID runs the drug trade. But one of the just because I think Data Republican, you're sort of a more recent sub. So here's a really funny one that I've been meaning to blow up more. I think it was 2009 Cuba. It's like one of my favorites. This is up there with my favorites. Oh, look, Johns Hopkins University Press. Johns Hopkins. We're going to get to that because the JH here stands for Johns Hopkins. So we're going to be talking about Johns Hopkins today. So, of course, published in the Journal of Democracy. But if you guys want the link, put it right here. This one is just so funny. 2009, Obama administration. And one of the things I love about this so they're trying to overthrow, the CIA is trying to overthrow the government of Cuba from the inside. They're trying to organize large-scale riots. This would metastasize into the Zunzanillo scandal with the fake CIA Twitter to simulate a Cuban Spring, organizing smart mobs by creating a Twitter that looks like it's run by Cubans because Cuba at the time had banned Twitter. So they took humanitarian funds earmarked for relief in Pakistan. They ran them through a Byzantine labyrinth of offshore banks and Cayman Islands bank accounts and Panamanian and Spanish front groups. And then they built this app. They blocked Congress from any oversight. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee was told they could not be told, quote, even in broad strokes, what they were doing with this program because people would die. They lured people in Cuba to this platform, advertising that it was a platform for music, sports, and hurricane updates and pop culture. And then internally, they plan to activate them with smart mobs and change the algorithm to get people to hate their government and to take to the streets in a violent street revolution to oust the government. Again, I'm no fan of the Cuban government. I hate communism. But understand, that was 2009. In 2016, all this anti-communism work was transitioned to anti-populism. So we're up against the same structure. But it's great. So they're talking about this Journal of Democracy piece goes over how do we get the Afro-Cubans? How do we get black Cubans? How do we create ethnic cleavages within Cuba the same way we do everywhere? Remember how I say you always go to the CIA World Factbook to look at a country's demographics, and that will tell you who they're working with, what ethnic leaders they're working with, to get community leaders, to create racial tension, to create destabilization, to create street riots. They do the same thing on religious grounds, on gender grounds, on sexual orientation grounds. That's why LGBT is such a big cleavage point to pull on, and has been since the 1990s by the State Department, the Pentagon, the CIA, NED, U.S. Institute of Peace, you name it. But so they go over this. It's like, okay, Afro-Cubans are like 60% of the population. That should be enough to do a revolution. So how do we appeal to black Cubans? Because they're underrepresented in the Cuban government. The Cuban government is almost all white. We can get them to hate their government by arguing that they're facing racial repression. How do we motivate them? So they commission a RAND study. RAND is the sort of CIA's think tank. RAND is to the CIA for operational purposes what Stratfor is for analyst purposes. It's one of these, outside, it's funded, I think they get billions of dollars over the past decades, but I think they get hundreds of millions of dollars in government grants, and they function as a think tank for the intelligence community, the diplomatic sphere, and the defense sector. When the State Department wants a policy done, or the CIA/NED gets an idea like, hey, how do we activate the Afro-Cuban population in Cuba to revolt against their government? So Rand will commission a study to look at young Afro-Cuban people and do a sort of cultural anthropology job to see what their likes and dislikes are, what motivates them, what their pain points are, what the coalition looks like. This is what Barack Obama's mother, when she was working for USAID, was doing. This is Ann Dunham, Barack Obama's mother. That's interesting. She attended, I didn't even know that. She attended the University of Washington. University of Washington, wow. Kate Starbird's outfit. The big censorship supercenter set up by Kate Starbird at University of Washington, which is popping off right now in the, I think $1 million of damage last night with the campus protests, Antifa. This is like the home of Antifa, because University of Washington is like the big Seattle area one. Seattle is Bill Gates. Seattle is the military via the Puget Sound. Fort Lewis, that's it. This is one of these PSYOP centers. You get these weird military CIA connections to Antifa that we're not going to get into, but let me skip the Indonesia section so you can see what I'm doing, I'm going with this. Oh, look at that. The unions, of course. Wow, look at all these Indonesia references. Now, this was at the time that the U.S. military and CIA were deeply, deeply involved in Indonesia. They were doing the military conquest of East Timor. That's what it was. I didn't even see it. It was East Timor. And so they had to do all this cultural anthropology work to do exactly what Rand is doing here in the Cuba case. So it says in Indonesia, let's see. Okay, so Barry, the father, Obama's father, was returned to Indonesia in 1966. Right, that is exactly when the CIA Indonesia 1965, the coup that backfired from CIA.gov. Just getting back to this, you'll see what she was doing was, I want to get to her cultural anthropology work. Maybe if I search for economic hitman at the University of Indonesia. I wonder if the University of Indonesia was getting USAID funding at that time. Okay, so then she was working with the labor groups. Rural industries consultant, meaning she's like liaising with the local hillside guerrillas, the rural guerrilla groups that they're trying to recruit into this little CIA army. Yeah. Funded by USAID in Jakarta. Implemented through Development Alternatives, Inc., DAI. Now, Development Alternatives, Inc. is one of the largest recipients of USAID. I think they're number 6 or 7, or number 4. It's like Catholic Relief Charities, Commonix, DAI. This is how long these things have been around as CIA fronts by way of USAID. This is in 1978. Ford Foundation, another CIA front. That literally got busted in the 1975 Church Committee hearings, the Ford Foundation's role in the CIA. We could do some watch videos if you guys are interested in that. Microfinancing. Gee, I wonder who they're financing. More Pakistan. Agriculture Development Bank. Okay, so they're just going to onboard all of the agriculture, the crop workers, the peasant class. Let's see. She was consultant and research coordinator. Just researchers for Indonesia's oldest bank in Jakarta, with her work funded by USAID and the World Bank. She's awarded a PhD in anthropology. Anyway, she's doing all these this anthropological work, and this is what's happening here. So I just want to get back to this. According to the Rand study, this is from the NED Journal of Democracy. and other reports, young people are largely alienated from official politics and increasingly drawn to a subculture of rap music, drugs, and crime. Afro-Cubans, who make up a majority of the populace, have an especially hard lot, making up disproportionately large shares of the poor and those in prison. Politically, institutional capacity that could hobble the ability of Fidel's successors to address the awesome challenges they face, not the least of which will be that of managing the growing polarization between the regime's loyalists and an apathetic and resentful populace. But basically, they say, listen, the people we want to target here, the majority of the population, are these Afro-Cubans. And they're poor, they're drawn to rap music, drugs, and crime. Great, let's get them. We deal in all three. And this is part of, this sort of running series. And thanks, Spiral, Scott Ford Foundation, CIA history link here. This gets us back to my fascination with the CIA and rap music. They're saying they're drawn to rap music. So, of course, what do? They funded the Cuban rappers. And we saw the same thing in 22 different countries that we've covered that USAID has rap music programs in. It's all for the same reason. They get some third-party assessment from IRI or NDI or RAND or Atlanta Council or Carnegie that says, this is how we get them. This is what they're listening to. We need to produce that. And of course, they cite the Poland Solidarity Movement as a model for how to rally people. Of course, it later came out that something like $70 million were funneled in black duffel bags in cash by the Central Intelligence Agency to the Solidarity Movement, the Union movement in Poland during the Cold War. This is why NED, who publishes the Journal of Democracy, why their union arm is called the Solidarity Center. It's because of the Solidarity Movement. Anyway, lots of fun stuff in there, but that's sort of apropos of nothing, except to say that I think that a truly deep mining and any tool that can be created around the NED Journal of Democracy is a mitzvah. All right, let me play like 2 seconds of a song so I can just vibe shift into what we're getting to today. So, there's so much that we need to cover. There's a lot happening in the world, and there's a lot in our continuing series. We have a lot of threads open. I'm going to try to move linearly through some of this. Just some things in the news that I wanted to hit on in a general sense. I'm afraid, though, I'll tell you, what I wanted to do today was to do a deep dive on the 2025 Democracy Playbook by Norm Eisen. This is something that is a big part of my origin story, if you will. It wasn't really the origin, but a big inflection point for me. And nobody knows this history except you guys. I previewed it to you, and I made a public post for the first time about it this week. That this whole I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I don't know how to tell this story candidly without saying that the world knows about Norm Eisen because of me. I put Norm Eisen on the map in September 2020 with a bombshell series that I published in Revolver with Darren Beatty. And I was doing this Color Revolution series with and for Revolver. And one of the things that I discovered in mapping out that network, this is back in 2020, was the central role of Norm Eisen in it. and I covered what was then the Democracy Playbook 2019. I can pull this up for you guys if you're interested. Revolver meet Norm Eisen, legal hatchet man. I remember I remember writing this title into a Google Doc. I remember exactly where I was. I remember exactly what it looked like on the page. I remember bullet pointing out all of these, one second. I remember bullet pointing out each of these things before converting it into prose. Here's the, and I was an anon at the time, obviously. I was just sort of I had no public presence. I was working in the admin in the White House. But I saw all this, and Revolver was an outlet to publish it, and Darren and I have been close friends for a very long time. But this totally took off. Everyone covered it. Tucker covered it, Glenn Beck covered it. There were huge responses from mainstream media, and this really created public awareness of who Norm Eisen is, what he was doing, how much he was responsible for, glimpses into the network around him. And the centerpiece of it was, you'll see this here. The Democracy Playbook, this is the 2019 one that I was pulling from, Preventing and Reversing Democratic Backsliding. And I saw that Data Republican did a thread breaking out, deconstructing this thread, Democratic backsliding. And I meant to quote tweet that and add to it, and then life got in the way. So I want to hit on this now, because it's also going to tie into our other topics tonight. Actually, let me pull up Data Republican's thread, and I'll just sort of live annotate it. But I can tell you the central thing that I remember wanting to post but not getting a chance to. Okay, so this was Data Republican's thread on this. And let me just tell you the central point that is the most important thing about Democratic backsliding, which is that it is a predicate to use the CIA, the State Department, if necessary, the U.S. military itself, and if not the U.S. military in a kinetic sense, the civil political branch of the military, as well as USAID and the entire NGO and civil society swarm army, which includes the rule of law programs to influence the judges and prosecutors, the unions, the trade labor groups, the street muscle, the universities to activate the thought leadership, the media organizations to create media surround sound. All of the cloak and dagger tools of the classic era of the Central Intelligence Agency, but simply through the restructured layers after the restructurings in the 1970s, 1980s, and then in the post-Cold War moment, to overthrow governments that are not communist and not even authoritarian. Let me break that down in a little bit less words. The incredible danger, importance, existential attack on everything American at home and our values abroad that is allowed through this phrase, democratic backsliding, is that it allows you to activate CIA tools against non-CIA targets or non-traditional CIA targets, like ourselves and like allied countries around the world, even when they're not guilty of anything, okay? It allows democratic backsliding is this nifty little turn of phrase that allows you to weaponize the entire toolkit of American intelligence, American statecraft, American development, and to some extent, the American military, even when the country has done nothing wrong and you can prove nothing wrong. No serious gassing their own people like we had to gin up with Assad. Weapons of mass destruction like we had to gin up for Saddam Hussein. Massacring his own people like we did with Gaddafi. A totalitarian system of communism or authoritarian rule like we had to gin up during the Cold War, or with Venezuela. You could literally have a country just like the United States, including the United States, which they say is undergoing democratic backsliding, and that allows you to get away with murder. What would otherwise be murder of the restrictions that we place on the CIA, the State Department, USAID, the NGO sphere. It is authorized. It is a FISA warrant, if you're following the analogy, to get their hands on things that they would never be allowed to get their hands on without this concept. You guys remember, I did a video explaining how this works at the framework level called Proxies, Predicates, and Pretexts. We're going to put this here below. I won't repeat all of this. But you need to create a pretext to do something under law. How can they do this to us? Well, the answer is there's a slippery little pretext that's created. So, for example, in Operation Northwoods, you guys remember the name of the document is this probably the most famous, worst nightmare conspiracy document of all time. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think this is literally the craziest government document of all time. Crazy people talk about this document a lot, but for good reason. It really is the sort of thing that once you see, you cannot unsee. It almost feels hackneyed to go over it because I just assume everybody knows this, although I assume that nobody is really, very, very few people have actually digested in total its implications or really fine-tooth combed it like I have a billion times. This is in 1962. JFK is president. This is after the Bay of Pigs failed. Now, this was unanimously approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. Unanimously approved. And I know we've covered this a bunch of times on stream, but it's relevant to this point. And you'll see the subject is called Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. So it's called Justification for U.S. Military Intervention. Again, we had just tried the Bay of Pigs, a CIA DOD attempt to overthrow it by paramilitary means, and that failed. And there is not the political will, as you'll see. I'll just read some of this. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have considered the attached memorandum for the Chief of Operations Cuba project. Now, this was sent to JFK's desk because it was unanimously approved by the Joint Chiefs. JFK rejected it. And instead of being tried for attempted murder, as Lyman Lemnitzer, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the guy who ginned this up, Lyman Lemnitzer, right here. Lyman Lemnitzer instead got promoted after JFK was assassinated to be the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Okay? So, and this plan was killing our own people to create, in a false flag operation, to create a U.S. military, to create a justification, a pretext for the military intervention, the military takeover of Cuba. And that also involved hijacking our own airplanes, bombing our own naval ships and sinking them, organizing street rent-a-riots on the streets of Miami, where I am, and each of these has false flags. Literally, all of these are proposals to the president. So literally create street riots here in the U.S. organized by the U.S. Army. And we're going to get to this when we get to the Ed Martin situation on North Carolina. Because that's coordinated out Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So we'll read for it, but here we go. The Joint Chiefs recommend that the proposed memorandum be forwarded as a preliminary submission for planning purposes, input from other agencies for developing a time-phased plan. It is recommended that this responsibility for both overt and covert military operations be assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Joint Chiefs of Staff. Joint Chiefs of Staff, at their meeting on March 13th, 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff approved this recommendation. In the Commandant had expressed direct concern of the Marine Corps in this matter. Now, the Marine Corps play a huge role in January 6th. I'd like this week to do a full thing on January 6th, if that is what is necessary. I have a million other projects and special projects and things that I'm doing, but it may be time for me to just kind of say everything about the Fedsurrection. If that's what's necessary as a rebuttal to the Tom Tillis thing, and if that will motivate FBI, DOJ, I think it may be time. And you guys are going to be, well, I think you're going to be pretty shocked when you hear what I have to say about this and my role in this. But I think it's time I have to say it. But when I published when I tell you about that, I'll tell you more. But we left out. Okay, I don't know how much shop I can talk about this. Sorry, give me a second to collect myself. An unbelievable proportion of the frontline people at the 11:53 a.m. Penn Walkway entrance initial perimeter breach of the Capitol. You guys I promise you, there's not a single person on planet Earth who knows more about the Fedsurrection than me. And the people who do know about it know it because of me. I'm just going to say that. It's just the undisputed truth. A lot of them don't know that. A lot of them do, but it's not public. But when the initial series on this was published, I had whole sections in here about the role of the Marines in January 6th. And it was, we left it out, but it's a separate side story here for reasons that are, I think the thought process was that it would alienate members of the military to sort of implicate a military role in this at the time. And that, these pieces were already so long and so sprawling that, what is that Ben Franklin quote? This book, by its very length, defends itself against the risk of ever being read. So I think there was some of that. Well, do we really need all these vast sweeping sections on the military role? It might alienate a big part of the MAGA audience. It might, and it adds a huge amount of heft. But I know it's there because I did it. I wrote it. And anyway, we'll get back to that. Let's keep going through this memo here. One sec. Justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. As requested by Chief of Operations Cuba Project, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are to indicate brief but precise description of pretexts which they consider would provide justification for U.S. military intervention. They are proposing false flags, something that would give us a pretext to go to war. And again, I'm connecting this to this Democratic backsliding concept because you have to understand, because when I saw Data Republican's thread, I thought it was very good in its technical overview. I'll read a little bit from her thread here. Deciphering Ned Drop, what is Democratic backsliding? Open, closed societies? Yes, right. This is the effective framework, which is to say that anything that is deemed to be an open society is the ideal, and anything less than that is going through Democratic backsliding. Of course, they don't really mean open. They mean controlled by the democratic institutions, which are all assets of state, CIA, USAID. Yes, overriding countervailing institutions, and that's it. That's why I always come back to this word institutions, or sometimes they'll call them democratic institutions, or just institutions for short. We've talked about this a lot, right? USAID funds independent media organizations because media organizations are a democratic institution. Oh, so you'll fund Breitbart? You'll fund Washington Free Beacon? You'll fund Tim Pool? No. You're not counted as a institution. You're bad media. You're populist media. Nothing means what they say it means. This is a language designed to create the world's largest Moat and Bailey trick so that they can say one thing and they all know what they're talking about because they are professionals in the field. They spend their whole time reading scholarship, submitting consensus white papers, talking about it in panels, talking about it in the office, back-channeling with Congress about it, back-channeling with civil society organizations about it. It's designed to fool voters and to fool oversight and to create a diplomatic patina so you can get away with the pretext, so you can get away with the justification. The main PowerPoint of this term is that ordinarily you could not use USAID against the United States of America. USAID does democracy promotion work, but we're not a terrorist country. We're not a communist country. We're not an authoritarian country. So you can't use it here. But what happens if you invent a term like democratic backsliding? And USAID's remit is to stop democratic backsliding wherever it is. Well, they can lump it in then. You can overthrow your own government with that justification, with that pretext. And I say this a lot, but it bears repeating, and I'll just keep saying it. The difference between murder and self-defense is whether you have a justification, a pretext to do it. It's the same act. You take out a gun, you shoot someone in the head, you've killed that person. But is it murder, where you could face the electric chair or life in prison? Or is it self-defense, in which case you skate completely free? The only question about whether you live and die after pulling that trigger is whether you have created a sufficient pretext. That's what democratic backsliding does. It converts murder into self-defense while carrying out murder. It lets them get away with murder. Just to put the button on this with how this was done, for example, by the Joint Chiefs of Staff running the military in 1962 under JFK, is recognize that any action which becomes pretext for U.S. military intervention, again, intervention just means takeover, military action. They have to say intervention like they're saving you from yourself. But we did an intervention in Iraq. We did an intervention in Libya. We did an intervention in Afghanistan. It's a military takeover. The military takeover in Cuba will lead to a political decision, which could then lead to military action, okay? So they are trying to create the predicate for a political decision that could lead to military action. The problem is they can't do it politically without a justification. So they're doing a false flag, they're planting false flags to create that political decision, that political justification. Cognizance has been taken of a suggested course of action proposed by the U.S. Navy around Guantanamo. Discussion. The suggested courses of action, appended to Enclosure A, are based on the premise that U.S. military intervention will result from a period of heightened U.S.-Cuban tensions, which place the United States in the position of suffering justifiable grievances. So right now there are insufficient grievances to overthrow the government with a military coup. Tanks, jets, ships, World opinion and the UN Forum should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash and irresponsible, and as an alarming, unpredictable threat to the peace of the Western Hemisphere. This is just what they're doing with Trump. That's what all of this histrionic language about Trump's a Nazi, Trump's an autocrat, he's establishing an autocracy, he's going through democratic backsliding. This is what this is designed to do, to develop this image and to create the impression that this will have cataclysmic consequences if emergency action is not taken, and to create a perception of suffering such extensive grievances that something as much as a military takeover is justifiable. Applejack says, amazing this was ever declassified. Do you know the story about its declassification? It's declassified, I believe it was 1998. Let's see if my memory recalls. I think it was 1998. The story behind its declassification is amazing. Yeah, 1997. The story behind its declassification is amazing. You want to know it? It was by accident because JFK was a Democrat, beloved by the Democrats. They always thought that the GOP CIA played a role in his assassination. The anti-communist CIA, which was anti-socialist and anti-Democrats in large respect. This is a big part of the power base of the Republican Party, is that the Bush family, the Eisenhower construction of the national security state grew out of this intensely, and I'm not knocking it when I say this, but this sort of capitalist right-wing is not really the right way to put it, because it was also neoliberal, but it grew out of this right-wing anti-communist justification. Oliver Stone publishes this movie JFK in 1991, and Bill Clinton gets into office. This movie creates a firestorm among Democrats, and they say, we need the JFK files declassified. Bill Clinton gets into office. Democrats are getting hammered by their voters, by their base. They're getting hammered in TV and radio questions. They're getting hammered in town halls. They're getting hammered in parts of the media. And so to be responsive to the Democrat base outroar over the questions that came out of the Oliver Stone JFK movie, and it's popular watching, was Congress set up something called the Presidential Records Assassination Review Board to declassify JFK documents to satisfy their Democrat base. Does that sound familiar? What do you think the declassification effort was for the Republicans? This is what the dig is at ODNI. This is what the release of the JFK files. It was the same thing, except it was the Democrats leading it at that time in the 1990s. And so Congress ordered the declassification in the 1990s through the Presidential Records Assassination Review Board of all files that were still classified relating to JFK. And they only published actually a quite significant volume. That was the first real set of real disclosures and declassifications in the 1990s. And then Trump would do another declassification in 2017, and then another one just last month. Chad Spear, monthly supporter, thanks. And in the course of that, this document, Operation Northwoods, this appendix was declassified. And so it took independent researchers coming through the files to actually point out, oh my God, did you read the enclosure? The suggested courses of action appended to enclosure A satisfactorily respond to the statement of the problem. However, these suggestions should be forwarded as a preliminary submission suitable for planning purposes, together with similar inputs from other agencies. Again, this is coming from the U.S. military. Mark Milley, the Mark Milley equivalent, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962, who would incidentally be involved in the creation of another false flag riot at the Capitol in 1970, which is a whole other story. Yes, the U.S. military and the Joint Chiefs literally did a Capitol riot to blame on anti-Vietnam protesters in 1970. They've done this before the Fedsurrection. But it's a story for another time. Let's stick with this. So this is how the interagency process works. An agency submits, and then all the other agencies submit their review and input. That's what it's called. provide a basis for a single integrated time-phase plan to focus all efforts on the objective of justification for U.S. military attacks. Again, that means false flag. It is recommended that Enclosure A, together with its attachments, should be forwarded to the Secretary of Defense, that was Robert McNamara, for approval. Now, was it Robert McNamara? Yeah. Lobster to Banker Pipeline? Robert McNamara, JFK's Secretary of Defense, the head of the Pentagon, this guy right here, after he left the Pentagon, 1968, he became president of the World Bank, just like Mark Milley, I believe is at JP Morgan. Lobster to bankster, just like Tom Donilon, who was National Security Advisor and CIA Director's Award winner, who Joe Biden wanted to be the head of the CIA, the guy who did NATO enlargement in the 1990s for the State Department, ran military intelligence and State Department, and he is now, as we've covered so many times, the chairman of BlackRock's brain, the BlackRock Investment Institute. Never was a banker before in his life. Being a high-level banker is not about reading spreadsheets and doing Warren Buffett-style value investing. No, it's about knowing what the CIA, the Pentagon, the State Department are going to do next. That will tell you what the markets will do, so you can bet on the markets before anybody else has the faintest fucking clue we're going to invade Afghanistan, before anybody else knows that planes are going to go down and hit the Twin Towers, and so short the airline companies, buy insurance. So it was sent to Robert McNamara, who then passed on to JFK. JFK refused. It's recommended that this paper not be forwarded to commanders of unified or specified commands. This paper not be forwarded to U.S. officers assigned to NATO activities. Don't tell NATO. Don't tell NATO. Of course, Lyman Lemnitzer, who wrote this plan, would go on to be the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO for Europe. This paper not be forwarded to the chairman of the U.S. delegation for the United Nations Military Staff Committee. Hide this from everyone. Only 2 people get to see this document: the Secretary of War and the President of the United States. And here it is. Justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. This plan, incorporating projects selected from the attached suggestions, should be developed to focus all efforts on a specific ultimate objective, which would provide adequate justification for U.S. military action. Such a plan would enable a logical buildup of incidents to be combined with seemingly unrelated events to camouflage the ultimate objective of creating a justification for war, and create the necessary impression of Cuban rashness and irresponsibility on a large scale directed at other countries as well as the U.S., okay? So the plan will have a logical buildup of incidents to camouflage what we're really doing, our ultimate objective of going to war. The plan would properly integrate and time phase the courses of actions to be pursued. The desired resultant from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from the government of Cuba, develop an international image that's a threat to peace. Just like democratic backsliding is about creating, this is in furtherance of a plan to place the blob in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances and developing the international image of Trump as a threat to democracy. And democracy is the magic word that allows you to unleash the CIA, the State Department, USAID, and the NGOs. They know full well that they have suffered no defensible grievances. They know full well that Cuba at this time is not a military threat to the national security of the United States. The plan is not designed to counter an actual threat from Russia. The plan is designed to place the United States in the apparent position, apparent to others, so other people think that on the basis of what just happened, we should go to war with Cuba. Any of this sound familiar, by the way, with Trump, Iranian assassination plot? All of these Iranian threats murder for hire targeting Donald Trump. Of course, this is right after Ryan Routh actually did a murder for hire and contacted an Iranian guy and was working with Iranians are going to hit Trump with surface-to-air missiles. And then remember, it turned out, oh, Ryan Routh. It turned out actually, do you guys remember this? Iranian surface-to-air missiles to shoot down Trump's plane. Surface-to-air missiles and kill teams in new Trump plot. They've been smuggled by the Mexicans, the Mexican cartel, the Sinaloa cartel. That's who we gave the guns to in Fast and Furious, the Sinaloa cartel, to stop the Los Zetas cartel, because the Sinaloa was the CIA's cartel. Surface-to-air missiles from Iran with a Mexican smuggler. Oh, that sounds familiar. Wait a second. Ryan Routh, missiles, Mexican smuggler. DOJ ties Trump assassin suspect to human smuggler, a Mexican human smuggler. Send me an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade or Stinger missile, and I'll see what I can do. Trump is not good for Ukraine. Trump's plane. He sends an image. He gets on and off daily. But they blame this on Iran. Well, because if Iran were to assassinate the U.S. president, that would place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances to justify a military war with Iran. They want this operation to take place within the next few months. Inasmuch as the ultimate objective is overt military attack, it is recommended that primary responsibility for developing military and paramilitary aspects of the plan for both overt and covert military operations be assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff is going to do covert paramilitary recruitment. Today, that's Mark Milley covertly recruiting paramilitaries, meaning informal groups, gangs. Hey, that sounds familiar. The Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, 3%ers. These are all made up of former military guys comprising militia groups. That's how they were called. That's what they were called. They were basically called military adjacent militias. That is what paramilitaries are. They're militias rather than formal armies. Militia groups. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who does the covert recruitment of militia groups in tandem with the military action. And again, that's based out of North Carolina. Now here it is. This is where the magic happens. Pretext to justify military intervention. Now I want you to just don't look away. Don't say, that's weird. Okay, on to the next thing. I want you to just stare at this and look at it. This was unanimously approved by the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff. Unanimously approved. The head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff went on to be the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Pretext to justify. Lies to allow us to justify going to war. Since it would seem desirable to use legitimate provocation as the basis for U.S. military attack on Cuba, a cover and deception plan has been developed. A cover and deception plan. This is Mark Milley today. That's the job. Could be executed as an initial effort to provoke Cuban reactions. The same thing as the McCollum Memo, getting Japan to attack us in Pearl Harbor, the 8 action plan. A series of well-coordinated incidents will be planned to take place in and around Guantanamo to give genuine appearance of being done by Cuban forces. A series of well-coordinated incidences to establish a credible attack, not in chronological order. Start rumors, many. So this is the military. Now again, people think, wow, the military doesn't do this sort of thing. The military, they do bad things when they use missiles and jets, not understanding that the military is comprehensive between kinetic, civil, and political. The military can only take action if the political authorizes it. So the military has a civil military branch. And again, our blob chart for color revolutions, political influence, NGOs, and the military. This is a political operation to justify a political authorization of going to war through the civil political military. Okay? That's why you see the military all over Brookings, the military all over the Atlantic Council, funded by the Pentagon. The military all over these NGOs. As we talked about in that stream that we did when I gave the example of USAID has to coordinate everything it does with the US military. They do joint planning and joint operations in every theater each agency is involved in. And I gave the analogy of, if a cleaning lady wants to do some philanthropic cleaning of my house and she tells me she has to check with the Pentagon first, I'm probably not going to hire that cleaning lady, because I think, why do you need the Pentagon's approval to clean my house? The same thing if you're doing water irrigation along the Golden Crescent in Afghanistan, or if you're doing poverty relief programs in Kenya. Why do you need to coordinate with the military on that? Oh, because you're not really here to clean my house. You're here to achieve some civil, political goal of that military. Now let's get back to this. Start rumors, many. So again, this is not the CIA. This is not the State Department. The Pentagon doesn't directly control the media, right? Of course, as we've been over a million times, go back to the history of the Office of War Information in 1942 and the creation of a mass media ecosystem in this country. It grows out of the Pentagon. But the fact is the military is saying, we need to start rumors. Well, who does that? The CIA does rumors. The media outlets who are working with the government start the rumors, and they're amplified through the CIA media channel, the USAID media channel, the State Department Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs media channel, the State Department International Organizations media channel, all that. The U.S. Agency for Global media channel, the Voice of America media channel. Start rumors. That's why I see so many of these rumors originate from Voice of America, or Radio Free Liberty Radio Europe, or Radio Free Asia. They'll start there, and then they'll get sourced by the AP or Reuters and covered in the New York Times. And now suddenly the rumors are real. And this is how you have the military role in the control of rumors. They're in the business of it. This is why I always say disinformation experts are just disinformation artists. They claim some, special expertise in disinformation. Well, what the fuck do they know about disinformation and rumors? Oh, yeah, that's right. They're professionally paid to start rumors. It's like, their argument is like, catch me if you can. It's like, hiring a felon to catch a felon. That's like the best case scenario to justify it. But here you go. Let me go to, let me show you, since we talked about Kate Starbird and the military in Seattle and what's happening in Seattle. Kate Starbird, rumors. You go, University, UW. Dr. Kate Starbird shares research on rumors. Rumoring during the 2020 and 2022 election.
Take you back a little bit to 20.
In 2020, our team identified 20 plus million tweets. Hey, didn't they relate to false, misleading, and unsubstantiated claims? Hey, weren't they the ones who said 22 million? It's not 22 million. Do you guys remember that incident where this whole squad was like, it's not 20 million. We didn't go after 20 million tweets. Do you guys remember that? 22 million? You guys remember that episode? That was a big episode in the history of the Twitter files.
Election Integrity Project.
This is Kate Starbird and Stanford at UW and Stanford in the Atlantic Council and Graphica, the Pentagon's PSYOP shop.
Files, which Stanford and the University of Washington founded to monitor attacks on our elections.
Notice how he leaves out the Atlantic Council and Graphica from the Psychological Operations Research Center of the Pentagon, and the Atlantic Council with 7 CIA directors on its board, and annual funding from the Pentagon, the State Department, and the National Endowment for Democracy. Notice how he conveniently leaves that out? Why? It would make it sound a little less academic, wouldn't it, buddy? Gee, what's the CIA and the military doing here? Oh, no. It's 2 universities. There are 4 groups. Why'd you leave out the key 2 of them?
And you say some stuff about them that a lot of your critics say is not true, and that affects your credibility. You said the EIP was founded in response to the government.
That's absolutely true. We've covered that a million times. And there's literally the timeline chronology. I can't let anything pass these fuckers. Here it is. Operational timeline from EIP. Meeting with CISA to present EIP concept. They literally presented the concept for approval to the government. It was birthed by the government. Anyway, but you'll see rumoring during the 2020 election. You'll see rumor. Well, that's the job of the military. Start rumors. They're already in the business of rumors. Other incidents. Land friendly Cubans in uniform over the fence to stage attack on base. Now, understand what that means. Land friendly Cubans in the uniform of hostile Cubans over the fence to stage an attack on base. They're talking about the Guantanamo base. The reason Miami is blessed with so many Cubans is because we brought over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Cuban exiles. We funded them, we trained them, we gave them jobs, we gave them stipends. Marco Rubio is a descendant of that, as are many folks, friendly Cubans. What they're saying is take the military and CIA's network of Cuban exiles in Miami, dress them up to look like they're part of the Cuban military, and attack our own base, and then lie to the world and say that Cuba attacked us. This was jointly approved, unanimously approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley's people. Third incident, capture Cuban-friendly saboteurs inside the base. So say, okay, if we don't want to attack our own military base and lie and say someone else did it, put friendly Cubans, our Cuban exiles in Miami, simply bring them to the base and then describe them as being the communist Cuban government military folks inside the base. But when that's reported in the media, when that's reported in Reuters and the New York Times, they're going to leave out the parentheses. I'm not going to tell you, oh, actually, this was a Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley approved false flag operation. Does the military play a role in riots? Do you guys remember when we did the whole thing, the Pentagon's role in rent-a riots, and we went over a bunch of these examples? For example, Fort Bragg, the Information Warfare Center at Fort Bragg, staging and recruiting people for rent-a riots in West Africa. They literally planned race riots and then planned to have USAID give job fairs so that people could, black African workers would do race riots against Chinese corporations. I believe we went over the rent-a riot guide, I think from 1973. Number 4, start riots near the base main gate. But those riots would actually be done by friendly Cubans. Again, the parentheses would be left out. This would be reported by Reuters and AP and the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journals as being riots of enemy Cubans rioting at the main gate entrance to the building. Now, the military planned to, quote, start riots, and the world would not know it was actually started by the friendlies. Geez, it would be a shame if they did that on January 6th. Did Mark Milley play a role in starting riots near the main gate of the Capitol? Were the first people on the line, or the key inciters, provocateurs, were they actually, parentheses, friendlies? This was unanimously approved. And the only reason it wasn't done was because the president who got murdered a year later refused to do it. You think Joe Biden would refuse it? Do you think this could be done without even needing presidential authorization if a president is a lame duck and on his way out the door? January 6th was 2 weeks before Trump left office. He was a lame duck. You could just do it. You have the network built up. Some more actions unanimously approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Blow up ammunition inside our own military base. Start fires inside our own military base. Burn our own American aircraft on our own air base. The whole time, blame it on a foreign country so we can use that as a pretext to justify going to war with them. Lob mortar shells from outside of base into base. Damage the installations the taxpayers paid for. So, lob mortar shells, which the American taxpayers paid the Pentagon for. Shoot the base the American taxpayers paid for. and damage the installations the American taxpayers paid for. Oh, but make this top secret, special compartmentalized information that you keep classified for 35 years and never tell the people paying for it that actually this is a giant false flag operation. And also influence the media to make sure that they only report the official story, or else they'll be rumor mongering and engaged in disinformation and conspiracy theories if they accuse us of doing what we just put in fucking writing and submitted with unanimous approval from the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the President of the United States. Capture assault teams approaching from the sea in the vicinity. Capture militia group which storms the base. Oh, so the Pentagon would work with a fake militia group to storm the Capitol. I'm sorry, to storm the base. But when it's reported, it would look like they were conducting an attack. A militia group. Huh. You guys remember the entire coverage for the first 4 months of January 6th was all about the militias, the militias, the militias? It's all about the militias. That's what allowed them to categorize this as some sort of paramilitary overthrow of the government. That this was not just protesters or not mere riots, they were militias, a paramilitary. Well, riots carried out for false flags, for the military ones, literally have a fake militia group. Get them to storm the base so that you can justify the crackdown. Sabotage ship in harbor, large fires, naphthalene. So we also paid for those ships. The plan, unanimously approved, is to set our own ships on fire, set our Navy on fire, make sure those fires are large, a spectacle, make sure it looks good in photographs. Sink ship near harbor entrance. Conduct funerals for mock victims. So listen, maybe in lieu of 10, maybe number 10, simply attacking a ship isn't enough. Maybe it needs to go down. Remember the Maine? That's how we got the American Empire rolling in the first place when we won the Spanish-American War, because ship went down in Havana Harbor. So not just sink our own ships, but have a top secret military operation in place with fake documents and fake deaths. Sink the ships and conduct public funerals for mock victims. So they would create identities of people that they would say are dead and then feed it to the media that these people are dead and literally conduct funerals so that the media could report that these people really died. And I cannot fucking stress this enough. This was jointly approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. During January 6th, that was Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Funerals for mock victims, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Mark Milley equivalent, calls for. 3, a Remember the Maine incident could be arranged in several forms. Literally, you took the words right out of my mouth. Oh, it must have been when you were kissing me. This is the Mark Milley equivalent from 1962. A Remember the Maine incident could be arranged in several forms. We could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. The U.S. military, just blow up a U.S. military ship and blame Cuba. We could blow up a drone, unmanned vessel anywhere in the Cuban waters. Now, again, the magic of the parentheses. We could arrange to cause such an incident in the vicinity of Havana or Santiago as a spectacular result of Cuban attack from the air or sea or both. It has to be a spectacular. It has to be a Hollywood production. It has to be spectacular looking. That's key. But we'd blow it up ourselves, the military says. The presence of Cuban planes or ships merely investigating the intent of the vessel could be fairly compelling evidence that the ship was taken under attack. So not only would we blow up our own aircraft and blame a foreign government for doing it, but when the foreign government went to investigate simply because it was trying to help, hey, maybe some people, maybe we can save them, maybe they can survive. Their mere presence near the crime scene will allow us to say they did the crime. Think how sick and sadistic that shit is. Unanimously approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The nearness to Havana or Santiago would add credibility. especially to those that might have heard the blast or seen the fire. Other people can vouch for it. See, it really happened. See, guys, it really happened. We kind of left out that we did it and we planned it all in advance. The U.S. could follow up with an air-sea rescue operation covered by U.S. fighters to, quote, evacuate remaining members of the non-existent crew. Casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of national indignation. So again, let's just take this same role, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to this, Mark Milley. So they would do this emergency evacuation of a non-existent crew. You would not be told that in your newspapers. You'd be told they died, but they were never there. This is not some random homeless person's plan or some low-level junior, mid-level officer or even a 1 or 2 star general. These are 4-star generals. These are the highest of the highest of the highest top military brass in the United States of America, staging this elaborate, spectacular attack on ourselves for the purpose of having even though it would be a non-existent crew, they would still produce casualty lists in U.S. newspapers to cause a helpful wave of national indignation. Gee, remember Brian Sicknick? When I wrote this piece, Blood Libel, Brian Sicknick, and I busted the entire Brian Sicknick hoax and killed that story dead. And you guys don't know I did that. But the people who know. I wrote this on February 9th, 2021, 1 month after January 6th. MAGA blood libel. Why are they hiding the medical report? And this killed the Brian Sicknick story, that he was killed, that he was hit by a fire extinguisher. But blaming that death, what did that do? By the way, this turned out to be 100% right. When the medical report finally came out, showed he had not been killed by the protesters. It was not ruled a homicide. I have a lot more to say about this particular thing, but I'll leave that there. The casualty blamed on the insurrectionists caused a helpful wave of national indignation. 4, we could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. Now again, you've heard me say this a million times, and I will say it a million more. This entire apparatus has been repurposed from communism to populism, from fighting communism to fighting populism, from fighting left-wing communism to fighting right-wing populism, because they are both a threat to the blob center, the uniparty Washington consensus. I want to focus this down again, because I know I just read this to you, but don't look away. Do not say, huh, that's weird. Do not say, oh, man, crazy. I want you to really let this into your soul. The top entire senior leadership of the U.S. military proposed to the president who would get assassinated just 1 year after this, when he declined to go through with this plan, proposed that the U.S. military would develop a terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. So if you put that from the translator, from 1960s Cold War anti-communism to today, this would be Mark Milley proposing to develop a populist pro-Trump terror campaign in Washington. And what you would be told, and what you would be run out of your job or censored off the internet for questioning, is whether that is true. If the Joint Chiefs did this, the terror campaign was actually fake. even though it had real casualties or real damage, if it was actually a Fedsurrection, a Fed terror attack developed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, if you denied the Pentagon's official story, you would be kicked off Facebook for denying an officially verified violent event. You'd be kicked off of Twitter. You'd be kicked off of YouTube. You'd be censored into oblivion by the disinformation experts, who all strangely belong to the same military network. Develop a terror campaign in Washington. Hey, I thought the military is supposed to be fighting terrorism, not developing it. Oh, well, we do that too. Well, how often do you do it? Because you're awful casual about it here. You're awful cavalier. You just threw that out there? Well, we can develop a terror campaign. It's like ... like we always do. You're just going to drop that? No prefacing, no hemming and hawing? God, how often do you create false flag terror campaigns? How many terror campaigns? This one only got declassified because by the luck of the fucking draw, Oliver Stone made a fun movie. It took a Hollywood movie to make a whole production to get this declassified. And that was before 9/11. Where now it's much harder because the national security state says, well, this will undermine U.S. global leadership if the world finds out that we did this. Think about what Russia will say at the United Nations. They'll hold up this declassified document and say that we're the real terrorists. But we were the real terrorists. Yeah, but they're not supposed to know that. What I'm saying is this, pay special attention to what I'm telling you here. This is not just Mark Milley's predecessor planning a terror campaign on the streets of the city closest to Cuba. They're planning it in Washington, D.C., far, far, far from Cuba, because that's where it will have the most political impact. Our capital is under attack. Gets better. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley's equivalent, proposes hijacking attempts against civil, air, and surface craft should appear to continue as harassing measures condoned by the government of Cuba. Hijacking against civil aircraft, hijacking our own airplanes. The Pentagon, less than 40 years before 9/11, proposed hijacking our own civil aircraft. And again, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs proposing this became Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Concurrently, genuine defections of Cuban civil and military air and surface craft should be encouraged. And this is probably the most famous passage from this. I'm going to read it slow. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civil airliner en route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, Panama, or Venezuela. The destination would be chosen only to cause the flight plan route to cross Cuba. The passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday, or any groupings of persons with a common interest to support chartering a non-scheduled flight. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban... Think about how tortured this sentence is. Notice how much more tortured it is than we can develop a terror campaign and carry out acts of terrorism on the streets. It was like, yeah, okay, like we always do. But look at the layers for this one. They know they need to contort the language to make it sound like, well, this one's kind of dicey. It is possible to create an incident, a false flag terrorist incident, which will demonstrate convincingly to the wider public, and not demonstrate, which will lie convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has shot down a civil airliner where, according to the Pentagon plans, the passengers would be a group of college students or people on holiday. An aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. The actual registered aircraft would be converted to a drone. So the U.S. military would have a military aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary like Air America or Continental Air Services. And it would be painted to be an exact duplicate of the civil airliner, say American Airlines flight yada yada, flight 93. We'll get back to the hijacking our own airplanes and the details there. Let me get back to the terror campaign. The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the U.S. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. We could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the U.S., even to the extent of wounding in incidences to be widely publicized. So we bring over these immigrants, and then they're brought over in these CIA, USAID military refugee programs. We could attempt to kill them or wound them, and even though we're the ones attacking them, we'll blame it on a foreign government. And if we wound them, it would be widely publicized. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots. Oh, man. You mean like the January 6th pipe bombs, Mark Milley? But here is the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley's group, planning to explode plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots. And then they would arrest people and say that, oh, actually, they were agents of Cuban. Use of MiG-type aircraft by U.S. pilots could provide additional provocation. Harassment of civil air attacks on surface shipping and destruction of U.S. military drone aircraft by planes made to look like they're Russian MiGs would be useful complementary actions. You see how detailed this all is? They're stacking layers of false flags. We'll do this one and we'll add this other false flag as a complement. An F-86 properly painted would convince air passengers that they saw a Cuban MiG, especially if the pilot of the transport were to announce it. Say you have to have a CIA and or military guy as the pilot. What you just saw was an enemy fighter plane. Oh, it's actually been painted. It's actually a CIA proprietary that's been painted to look like that. The primary drawback to this suggestion appears to be the security risk inherent in obtaining or modifying an aircraft. However, reasonable copies of the MiG could be produced from U.S. resources in about 3 months. Look at how detailed the logistics are. Everything else they thought they could do easily, but this one, we might get caught if we fuck up the plane, if the media catches on hey, that doesn't look like a MiG. So again, the world would think that a civilian airliner, a U.S. civilian airliner carrying U.S. citizens on vacation or going on a college trip was shot down out of the sky. But what actually happens, according to the plan that they're proposing, is a CI proprietary airplane painted to look like an Air America flight or a TSA flight would actually depart from a military base. And the people on board were actually given carefully prepared aliases. Takeoff times of the drone aircraft and the actual aircraft will be scheduled to allow a rendezvous south of Florida. From the rendezvous point, the passenger-carrying aircraft will descend to a minimum altitude and go directly into an auxiliary field at Eglin Air Force Base. Understand the details of logistical planning here. The CI proprietary, painted to look like the civilian airliner, like the Air America flight or the JetBlue flight or the Delta flight, would take off at about the same time as the scheduled flight, carrying the passengers, carrying aliases. Then the CIA aircraft would fly behind the civilian aircraft, but fly at a minimal altitude so that radar could not detect it. This is how radar is evaded, by flying low to the ground, because radar detects what's flying. If you fly low to the ground, radar doesn't pick it up. So you can't have, for example, in a NORAD simulation, for example, or NORAD would track the radar and relay to the tower, relay to the pilot, holy shit, there's another aircraft flying right behind you. But they wouldn't see it because the Joint Chiefs had planned for that by having the CI proprietary descend to a minimal altitude so radar would not pick up on it. And then the CI proprietary flight, painted to look like an Air America flight, would keep going, and then we would say it's shot down out of the sky. But the actual civilian flight, the Air America flight, the Delta flight, the JetBlue flight, would actually descend to an Air Force base. So it would look continuous on the radar. The radar just sees it left the airport, and now it's flying past Cuba to Venezuela. But actually, the planes are going like this. Let me see if I can get the fingers right. This is the civilian airplane. It's going like this. The Joint Chiefs, and again, CI is support for state and DOD. So the Joint Chiefs say this plan will involve the CIA flying another plane below, at minimal altitude, right behind the plane that everyone thinks is getting hijacked or about to be blown up by the Cubans, they say. And the civilian aircraft that you're going to read about in the newspaper, that you're going to read was shot down by a hostile foreign nation state, is actually going to descend as they're flying. It's going to descend into a military Air Force base as the CI proprietary airline, with the tail number and the commercial flight details painted to look like it's that same flight, will continue going. So the radar will just see one flight path, but it will look like this. Planned out by the military, interagency approval, because it will be a CIA airplane, where arrangements will be made to evacuate the passengers and return the aircraft to its original status. The drone aircraft, meanwhile, will continue to fly the filed flight plan. This was this thing here. The drone, the unmanned drone that's going to be shot down. So you have real people. Everyone says they're real people. We saw them at the airport. They're really on this thing, in this aircraft, but they have carefully prepared aliases. They're all working with the U.S. military, and they're going to descend onto the military base, and an unmanned drone painted with the serial number and the paint color and the branding of the commercial airliner will keep going, and the drone will blow up. When over Cuba, the drone will be transmitting the international distress frequency on Mayday. The drone will have a Mayday message stating it's under attack from a Cuban MiG. The transmission will be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by radio signal. This will allow ICAO radio stations in the Western Hemisphere to tell the U.S. what has happened to the aircraft instead of the U.S. trying to sell the incident. So they're going to put a Mayday distress signal. At that point, they'll broadcast it on the radio. This broadcast has been interrupted. This plane is in distress. It looks like it's under attack by a Cuban MiG. And then everybody will hear, it's exploded. So the radio stations all over the Western Hemisphere, Miami, Jamaica, Guatemala, Venezuela, they will tell the U.S. what happened to the aircraft instead of us, the government, trying to sell it to them. The government didn't say this happened. You heard it live on the radio. You saw those towers fall with your own eyes. You saw it reported on CNN. Now, weirdly, the BBC reported that Tower 7 fell 23 minutes before it even fell, while it was famously still in the skyline. You guys remember this?
And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what?
Yeah, Jane Stanley. Now, as she is saying this, World Trade Center 7 is still behind her.
More can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 100.
Marriott. Pritzkers.
110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears burning. We see these huge...
Yeah, so here it is. You see the iconic line here. It's right here.
Clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York sky.
Distinctive, here it is up close. You guys see that distinctive bar line there? It's right here. They literally, in the attempt to have radio stations tell the U.S. what happened to the building, instead of the U.S. government trying to sell it, they told it a little early. This would be like the radio, like a Voice of America radio station reporting the plane had been shot down before everybody else got the live, we're interrupting your broadcast, and then hearing it get shot down. It's possible to create an incident which will make it appear that MiGs have destroyed a U.S. Air Force aircraft over international waters. Approximately 4 or 5 F-101 aircraft will be dispatched from Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, to the vicinity of Cuba. Their mission will be to reverse course and simulate aircraft for an air defense exercise. Oh, the simulations. Simulations. These aircraft would conduct variations of these flights at frequent intervals. On one flight, a pre-brief pilot would fly tail-end Charlie at a considerable interval between aircraft. While near the Cuban island, this pilot would broadcast he had been jumped by MiGs and was going down. No other calls would be made. The pilot would then fly directly west at extremely low altitude and land at a secure base. Again, this is key. Avoiding radar. Top-down logistical instructions from the Joint Chiefs. The aircraft would be met by the proper people, quickly stored, and given a new tail number. The pilot who had performed the mission under an alias would resume his proper identity and return to his normal place of business. The pilot and aircraft would then have disappeared. At precisely the time that the aircraft was presumably shot down, a submarine or small surface craft would disperse F-101 parts, parachutes, etc., at approximately 15 to 20 miles off the Cuban coast and depart. The pilots returning to Homestead would have a true story so far as they knew. Search ships and aircraft could be dispatched. So what they're saying is way out in the middle of bumblefuck nowhere, out in the middle of the ocean, the goddamn ocean, ahead of this operation, the military would secretly dispatch blown up parts of the same model of aircraft so that when unsuspecting rescue teams who have heard that a plane has been shot down, when they get to the scene of the crime, it looks like that crime happened, because indeed they did find exploded plane parts from that exact plane model right where they said it was blown up, not knowing hours earlier the U.S. military had planted them there. So when these U.S. civilians go on Johnny Carson, they go on Jimmy Fallon today, as a firsthand witness, so far as they knew, yeah, that's what they saw. They didn't hear the classified part of it, though. We actually blew up our own airplane. The plane that departed actually descended at low altitude, while a CI proprietary continued the flight path. And then we blew up that plane. And what you saw were the scattered parts pre-placed there by the military earlier. So the military is controlling every aspect of the operation. They're controlling the drone. They're controlling the placement of the parts. They're controlling the story. It's a lot like the military controlled every aspect of COVID and every aspect of 9/11. This is the level of detailed logistical planning just in the proposition. This plan wasn't even approved. It didn't even get to the advanced planning stages. So people say, oh, that's too complicated for people to think of. This is just in the initial proposal. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have previously stated that unilateral military intervention in Cuba can be undertaken only with a pretext. The need for positive action in the event that current covert efforts to foster an internal rebellion, an insurrection, are unsuccessful was indicated at last week's meeting. Determination that a credible internal revolt is impossible. We can't coup them. We need to send in the Marines. But we can't do that without doing so in a way that it's consistent with international norms and standards, and we don't look like warmongers to the international community. It will take 9 or 10 months for us to do this, get all the logistics in place. It is understood that the Department of State also is preparing suggested courses of action to develop justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. So the Joint Chief says these are our ideas, and let's see what false flag terror attacks the State Department comes up with to propose for the military to do, because this is what we propose for state and CIA and our equity to do. Okay, so this was a very long way of explaining the concept of democratic backsliding. Wow. Sorry, guys. That was 2.5 hours. Well, okay. Fuck, my syllabus. Was that a good or a bad use of time? Because I had a million things that I wanted to get to today, and we just lost 2.5 hours. If you guys are telling me that you're new to this, I'll throw a couple other things at you. So again, it's about pretext to war. October 1940. Estimate of the situation in the Pacific and recommendations for action. So again, we're reviewing the situation in Japan, just like with Cuba, and we are recommending actions for the United States. The U.S. finds herself today confronted by a hostile Germany and Italy in Europe and an equally hostile Japan in the Orient. The United States at first remained coolly aloof from the conflict in Europe, and there's considerable evidence to support the view that Germany and Italy attempted at every method within their power to foster a continuation of American indifference. Axis-dominated groups and the stimulation of Japan to further aggressions and threats in the Far East, in the hopes, by these means, the United States would become so confused and thoughtful and fearful of her own immediate security as to cause her to become so preoccupied in a purely defensive preparations as to virtually preclude U.S. aid to Great Britain in any form. In the Pacific, Japan, by virtue of her alliance with Germany and Italy, is a definite threat to the security of the British Empire. And once the British Empire is gone, the power of Japan, Germany, and Italy is to be directed against the United States. They're making the Ukraine argument. Boy, how grateful do you think the British Empire is for this? Again, I'm not even weighing into like general World War II, but understand, like, this is... Okay, all right. So, okay. An examination of Japan's present position as opposed to the United States reveals the situation as follows. Geographically, strong position of Japanese islands. Their advantages: a highly centralized and capable government, rigid control of economy on a war basis, a powerful army. Disadvantages: they're involved in an exhaustive war with China. Their domestic economy and food supply is severely constrained. They have a serious lack of raw materials, especially oil. They're totally cut off from supplies from Europe. They're dependent on overseas routes so they're saying they can't feed themselves or get oil without trade with foreign countries because they're an island. So in light of these advantages and disadvantages, they say we possess a very strong defensive position at present, capable of long-distance offensive operation. We can attack Japan. If we can get them to start a war with us, we can win that war. Especially the Philippines. We hold the Philippines. We have our military bases in the Philippines, so we can attack from there. Friendly and possibly allied government control of the Dutch East Indies. Britain still holds Singapore. Important Chinese armies are still in the field in China against Japan. And a naval force. A consideration of the foregoing leads to the conclusion that prompt aggressive naval action against Japan by the United States would render Japan incapable of affording any help to Germany and Italy in their attack on England, and that Japan itself would be faced with a situation in which her navy could be forced to fight on most unfavorable terms or accept a fairly early collapse of the country through the force of blockade, just like with Cuba, setting up a blockade. A prompt and early declaration of war after entering into suitable arrangements with England and Holland would be most effective in bringing about the early collapse of Japan and thus eliminating our enemy in the Pacific before Germany and Italy could strike at us effectively. Furthermore, elimination of Japan must surely strengthen Britain's position against Germany and Italy. In addition, such action would increase the confidence and support of all nations who tend to be friendly towards us. Now here's the kicker. 9. It is not believed that in the present state of political opinion, the United States government is capable of declaring war against Japan without more ado. And it is barely possible that vigorous action on our part might lead the Japanese to modify their attitude. Therefore, the following course of action is suggested. So once again, this is the military. This is Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCollum, in his capacity as Director of the Office of Naval Intelligence for the Pacific. Okay, so this is not as high a level as the Operation Northwoods, sort of Fedsurrection parallel. That was the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But this is still a senior position. Director of Office of Naval Intelligence. Hey, wasn't that Jack Posobiec's group? Look, I'm just playing around. This is the Director of Naval Intelligence for the Pacific, Arthur McCollum, born in Nagasaki, Japan, to Baptist missionaries, American naval officer, Rear Admiral, and a consultant to the Central Intelligence Agency, the guy who wrote this. Key figure in the Office of Naval Intelligence, Chief Commander of Far East. Served notable roles in intelligence from 42 to 45. His most notable contribution is the McCollum Memo. What year was the McCollum Memo declassified? I didn't even get to the best part of the memo, actually the kicker of the memo. Hold on a second. I think it was declassified like 95, right? 94. It took 50 years to declassify this. But I didn't even get to the kicker. Well, Mike, what's so bad about that? It's just doing an assessment. Oh, my sweet summer child. It is not believed that in the present state of political opinion, the United States government is capable of declaring war against Japan without further ado. So once again, we are back at the blob. We're back at civil political. Military is trying to impact domestic politics. The voters won't vote for it. The head of naval intelligence says political opinion won't allow us to declare war on Japan. But we want what we want. We want to impact the civil political, domestic politics. So what are we going to do? Provoke an attack on ourselves. Therefore, the following course of action is suggested, and this is why it's called the 8-action plan. Make an arrangement with Britain for the use of British bases in the Pacific. It's So have American naval ships operating out of British bases and have the Japanese see us do it. Make an arrangement with Holland for the use of base facilities there. American naval ships circling around there too. Give all possible aid to the Chinese government of Chiang Kai-shek. This is the origins of the CIA and U.S. military's role in drug running. You guys have heard me tell that story many times. 4, send a division of long-range heavy cruisers to the Orient, Philippines, and Singapore. Put battleships right up against them. 5, send 2 divisions of submarines to the Orients. Surround the island with submarines. 6, keep the main strength of the U.S. fleet, now in the Pacific, in the vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands. Oh, that sounds really familiar. I heard about that one. The military deliberately kept the main strength of the U.S. fleet in the vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands, but the only threat was at that point not even necessarily a threat. We were provoking a threat, although you could argue because they're allied with Germany, they're a threat, certainly. But we didn't have the political will to attack them. So put all these things out there, but leave a big stack right there in the Hawaiian Islands. 7, insist that the Dutch refuse to grant Japanese demands for undue economic concessions, particularly oil. So surround Japan, because we can't vote. The voters don't want to vote to attack Japan. So surround them with battle cruisers. Surround them with submarines. Fund their enemies and embargo their oil so that they have no oil. And their only way to survive as a country with no oil is to attack the Americans who are embargoing their oil so that they can get oil again. 8, completely embargo all U.S. trade with Japan in collaboration with a similar embargo imposed by the British Empire so that they don't have food, and so that on their island, while they're surrounded by our military and our aircraft and our submarines, they've got no food and no oil. And here it is. You guys see this right here? I'm going to blow this up. If by these means Japan could be led to commit an act of war, if by these means Japan could be led to commit an overt act of war, so much the better. If by these means, provoking them, funding a proxy war, cutting off their oil, cutting off their food, if by these means Japan is forced to attack us in an overt act of war, so much the better. While we park the bulk of our naval fleet in the vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands. This is the head of U.S. naval intelligence for the Pacific at the Pentagon 1 year before those means led Japan to commit an overt act of war in the vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands, Pearl Harbor, and the Pentagon 1 year before that happened said that was the goal, because otherwise we couldn't have entered World War II. And this took 54 years to declassify. But once again, it's the creation of a predicate, the creation of a pretext. This is a long-ass way of saying That's what Democratic backsliding is. Oh my God. I did not even get to the intro of the syllabus. This has got to be a record for the worst stream performance in keeping to the syllabus I've ever done. Literally the entire stream without actually talking about, look at everything I prepared for this stream. Look at all of this. Look at all of this. It's Data Republican's fault. She did a good job on her thread. But understand, like, okay, so just to put the button on this, holy cow, this is embarrassing. I'm sorry, guys. Wow. Not my finest moment. Okay, this is a long way of saying this is what Democratic backsliding is. We have a concept of democracy and autocracy. Autocracy, if it's declared, allows us to go to war with that country at the political warfare level, at the State Department level, at the USAID level, at the CIA level, okay? They don't have authorization to do that against friendly countries or our own government or democracies, because it's done for the purpose, ostensibly, of bringing democracy to autocracies. So this concept is your Operation Northwoods. This concept is your McCollum 8 action plan. It is a pretext to political war in a democracy by saying even though it's a democracy, and that is why they will use this term interchangeably. Democratic backsliding means the same thing as, you'll hear this often. Let me just pull it up. I'm just going to get a clean tab. You will hear this phrase interchangeably: illiberal democracy. Okay? This phrase. So, for example, Journal of Democracy from January 2019, illiberal democracy and the struggle on the right. This is a way of saying, okay, fine. It's a democracy. Viktor Orban got elected. Donald Trump got elected. Matteo Salvini got elected. Bolsonaro got elected. So, this is a little outside the wheelhouse of what the CIA, the State Department, the USAID-funded NGOs are supposed to do, or even allowed to do. And we can't call it an autocracy because they're popular, they're loved by their people, they won in landslides or Democratic landslides, they have a Democratic mandate. But we want to overthrow the government, man. We really want to overthrow them. But we're stuck in this democracy-autocracy binary, and we can't prove that they're an autocracy. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an in-between concept called illiberal democracy. Let me just open up let me show you how to let me draw this out for you, okay? Let me show you how to understand this framework. So you have democracy, and then you have autocracy. These are your two poles, and this is the binary of the entire Wilsonian order and the entire rules-based international order. And everything in CIA land operates along this axis. Now, one of the things that Data Republican accurately picked up on that we covered in the Future of NATO George Soros memo, but is all over State Department documents, USAID documents, U.S. Army War College documents, you name it. The way we traditionally have called the litmus test for whether something is one or the other is open society, and autocracy, closed society. Now, this is very deliberate. The reason this is the consensus back of the napkin litmus for whether we call something a democracy or an autocracy is because open means open to our control. How open is it for us to control it? Do they box out our media? Do they box out our union groups? Do they box out our judges? Do they box out the prosecutors we want to be in power? Do they box out the president we want to be in power? The prime minister that we want to be in power? Have they opened up their oil to us? Have they opened up their aluminum, their copper, their cobalt, their lithium, their diamonds, their gold, their wheat? they're bananas. If they've opened it to us, we call them a democracy. You don't need to vote. It ain't about that. You can think of it like, this is going to sound awful. It feels a little uncouth. This is a joke. I don't mean it. It's just, my tongue is in my cheek. If you imagine a butthole, okay? We call something a democracy or an autocracy is just about whether or not they leave their butthole open for us to ram things through it, or if they close up their butthole so we can't put anything in. That is literally the only difference. It's not about voting, okay? Nope. Might think, oh, voting, but the CCP has no votes, so no voting. Nope, no. We will lean into that sometimes as a pretext, okay? It's not what it is. The only question is open butthole for the blob or closed butthole. If they close their butthole, we send in the following agencies to open it up. If a country closes its butthole, and we therefore designate it an autocracy, it's oppressing its institutions, it's oppressing its people, that is what creates the predicate to descend on the autocracy and then shift it from a closed butthole to an open one. Okay? These guys are not allowed. They are not allowed to go here. This is not allowed. So what happens if you have a country like Hungary with Viktor Orban, or a country like Poland with the PIS party, or a country like Brazil with Bolsonaro, or a country like Italy with Matteo Salvini, India with Modi, or a country like the United States with Trump? They can't argue the election was illegitimate. They can't argue there's no democratic mandate. They have to create a middle ground called an illiberal democracy. It's a smaller node. It's somewhere halfway between democracy and autocracy. So the idea behind the CIA action is that you are taking a red thing and you are blue shifting it. You're transitioning it to democracy. That's why they call it democratic transitions. That's why USAID has the Office of Transition Initiatives. You're prying its butthole open. Okay? Now what they say is democracies can go backwards. This is this new concept of democratic backsliding. And what they say is you can have a democracy, but sometimes the darn thing, because of the way people vote in the democracy, it starts backsliding. This process for this term, this is what they call democratic backsliding. Now, my main feedback on the Data Republican thread is that getting into an argument about whether something is or isn't democratically backsliding is missing the entire point of the concept. The entire point of the concept is to get rid of this. Let me explain what I mean by this. When you are seeking a green light at the CIA level, and you say, we're going to overthrow the government of Brazil, the National Security Council says, okay, what'd they do? What'd they do wrong? Well, nothing. Can't really think of anything. They have oil relations with Russia, or Bolsonaro is going against the vaccines. He's railing against the vaccines. Nobody in Brazil is taking them. He's not buying any of the supplies. Bill Gates is a major donor. Pfizer is a major donor. It's a market of 220 million people, and plus it could set off a domino effect of all these other countries. Pick your reason. Well, shit, says the National Security Council. Shit, says the president. We can't say that. We can't tell the New York Times, yeah, we're going to overthrow a democratically elected government. We're going to send in the CIA as we send in Bill Burns. We're going to send the State Department. We're going to send in USAID with the tens of millions of USAID programming. We're going to send in the military as we sent Lloyd Austin to Brazil to protect the profits of Pfizer and do favors for Bill Gates. Oh, well, you know, he's also in a big war with the IMF. He's not agreeing to the terms for the loans. Oh, well, that's a big problem. Yeah, it is a big problem. We can't overthrow their government because it, though. Lula's going to get on good with them. We need a retail reason to sell to the American public. We need to be able to sell this. We're toppling the largest country in the Western Hemisphere. with the largest military. It's the number 10 economy in the entire world. This would be a massive scandal if we just called them a straight-up autocracy and just regime change them as an autocracy. So we need a way to sell this to justify U.S. aid going into what is ostensibly an already open butthole. These people are only allowed to go into closed buttholes to pry them open. If it's an open butthole, then they're good. The problem is we've created this thing, the semi-puckered asshole. That's what illiberal democracy means. Illiberal democracy just means semi-puckered asshole. So we are not allowed to use these on full-fledged democracies, but we always use them against autocracies. So how do you get the green arrow? Green means green light here. What you do is you simply say that the democracy is backsliding towards illiberal democracy, and so we're going to use less of the State Department resources, less CIA action, less U.S. aid funding than we would in the case of an autocracy. But yeah, it's still a threat to democracy because it's halfway to an autocracy. And then this gets them the green light, the authorization, and what they do is they just crank that up to 11 anyway and treat it like it's an autocracy anyway. And then from there, they can shift the illiberal democracy, a semi-puckered butthole, to a fully open one. Does that make sense? So this concept of an illiberal democracy is simply, democratic backsliding is what gets you from here to here, and therefore allows this. It allows you to crack open the Central Intelligence Agency, the State Department, USAID, DOD civil military, the NGOs, the IMF, the World Bank. You get it? Is that helpful? Again, it's all made possible because of this turn of phrase. One little rhetorical trick going unchallenged. Oh, well, I guess that's a legitimate concept. Once you accept the legitimacy of this, and you accept the legitimacy of this, then this becomes a fait accompli. You checkmate yourself. So while I love seeing that thread, and there were lots of great pulls from there, I talk about it in different terms because to even accept the terms on their face is to already lose. So I go upstream of the debate they want to have and say, no, actually, this concept entirely is illegitimate. Notice I did the same thing in the censorship debate. I don't go into, well, what is true? What is disinformation? What isn't disinformation? What is misinformation? No, I went upstream of it. I said it's censorship. Don't give a shit. You want to get in all these fine little layers about malinformation? How about this? The entire concept of the field of disinformation studies is illegitimate and will not receive a single fucking dollar of federal funding. Now go ahead, have your little academic debates about democratic backsliding, toxic conversations being a signal of democratic backsliding, the unfettered spread of election disinformation being one of the classic hallmarks of democratic backsliding. Go ahead, because I've moved the debate upstream of that. You can debate yourself, while at the legal and regulatory and funding level, we don't give a flying fuck about that distinction because we know what the whole thing is. Make sense? Okay. All right. Well, there's so many things for us to cover here. We didn't even get to the 2025 Democracy Playbook with Norm Eisen. Funding. I wanted to get to where the blob's NGO ponds are running to now with USAID funds running out. I want to just do a clean hit on all of these so you can see all the different ways that they're trying to get offset funding. Like the EU has opened up all these new money spigots, the UN has opened up all these new money spigots, NATO has opened up all these new money spigots, and they're pushing the private foundations like the Soros Foundation, the Gates Foundation, the Omidyar Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Knight Foundation. They're trying to get the private donations to do more direct subsidies since they have to offset what they lost with USAID. All right, fine. I'll do like 10 minutes. Okay. All right. I'll do 10-minute speed run. Hold on. do this. Okay. Isn't this an incredible? Brookings is so CIA that the CIA sends CIA officers to Brookings for training. This is 1983, the exact year that Ronald Reagan created the National Endowment for Democracy. CIA Training Selection Board, unique funding of 1984 Brookings Institution programs. CIA training. The Brookings Institution has informed the agency that beginning in April 1983, the lodgings and meals for each CIA officer attending programs in Williamsburg, Virginia, will cost more than the current per diem. I'm requesting your approval for granting us the authority to treat these expenses as part of the cost of training. It'll show up as tuition, like a school, a Brookings Institution school for CIA training. It will show up as training at non-CIA facility. So the Brookings Institution is CIA training at non-CIA facility. That's a great, I love that tag, non-CIA facility. Let's just call them all that. Random NGO is a non-CIA NGO. And so I brought that up because I was wandering around Washington, D.C., got a little lost on my way to the hotel, and I ran into a block that I'm sure I've walked down 100 times. It's actually right in the heart of DuPont. But I came with fresh eyes, and here's what I saw. Brookings. The Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Sciences. SAIS. Johns Hopkins SAIS. Understand, Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore. It puts Baltimore on the map. Or I guess the Johns Hopkins Hospital here. Okay. But their CIA school, because that's what SAIS is right here in the heart of Washington, D.C., on this strange little block, literally the building right next to Brookings and the Carnegie Endowment for National Peace. International studies. You said international science? International study. Remember, studies just means operations in Blobcraft. So think of it as School for Advanced International Operations. Okay? This is where CIA activity is outsourced to the university class. So they will do the thought leadership that advances the CIA agenda. They will do meetings and consensus building to bring together experts in our academic setting and exchanges in order to get everyone on board the CIA agenda. They will do white papers to advance the CIA agenda. They will do sub-grants to CIA proxies. Like, for example, Johns Hopkins hosted the friggin' Event 201, the COVID simulator. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is run from 2014 to 2021 by Bill Burns, who would then become head of the Central Intelligence Agency after running this think tank for 7 years. What qualifies you running the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace to be the head of the Central Intelligence Agency? And again, when you understand that these are CIA auxiliaries, makes a lot of sense. I love this shot because have you ever seen the main floor of the CIA? right? This is the lobby at Langley. And when I peered through, I was like, well, it's like the same color set. And it's like, you see what I mean? It's like, it's got that same sort of black, white marble with the, like, I just thought that was interesting. Probably means nothing. To me, I'm not saying anything's implied other than the fact that the guy who ran this place from 2014 to 2021 became the head of the CIA in 2021. But, and then, right, the same block, here's this building. This hotel would become known as the home of spies and double agents. It also housed Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles. And then I thought this was funny. I just saw this inside. There's a thing with Moby Dick. Chapter 1 loomings. This is for you guys. But I bring this up because I posted this. Today, Brookings runs the Brookings Intelligence Project, which includes private events to discuss covert action, CIA liaison relationships, and CIA priorities. So, the Brookings Intelligence Project. That project includes John McLaughlin, the CIA deputy director and acting director of the CIA, who said, "Thank God for the deep state to take out Trump." About the Brookings Intelligence Project, led by Bruce Riedel, a 30-year veteran of the CIA, supported by a team of resident and non-resident fellows and researchers, including the Federal Executive Fellows from the CIA, and former senior intelligence community leaders such as John McLaughlin, former deputy director of the CIA. One of their focuses is covert action, which they say is particularly vital. Foreign policy tool. The emphasis on the interaction between policymakers and intelligence operatives to influence policy. Intelligence liaison relationships. They're a convening body for both public and private events. So private, you might even call it covert.
The impeachment.
And here's John McLaughlin, who is one of the senior folks at the Brookings Intelligence Project. He's next to Michael Morell and John Brennan seated right behind him, right around him. This is in 2019 during the impeachment of Trump, and he's about to be asked by CBS if it's kind of inflammatory that they're impeaching President Trump with this Ukraine bullshit in 2019 because it looks like a deep state is trying to take out Trump. And here is what the acting director of the CIA said in response to that, who is a senior part of the Brookings Intelligence Project.
The impeachment inquiry is underway, sparked by a complaint from someone within the intelligence community. It feeds the president's concern and often used term about a deep state being there to take him out.
Thank God for the deep state.
Look at this bio. Former CIA acting director and CIA deputy director. Thank God for the deep state taking out Trump with the impeachment. That is Brookings, right next door to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, whose CEO became head of the CIA, full director of the CIA. Now, I didn't even know this until I looked it up, which is why, since I only have time for a short thing, we're doing this. I didn't even know this. This is why I mentioned the video. Johns Hopkins SAIS is the dark heart of all things blah bullshit. But when I went to look up more on John McLaughlin when I was doing this post, CIA under Bill Clinton and George Bush. John McLaughlin is an American intelligence official who was deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency, briefly director of the Central Intelligence Agency. What is he doing now? He is a senior fellow and distinguished practitioner in residence at the Center for Strategic Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies of Johns Hopkins University. I didn't even know that But he literally went from Brookings This was my point about these three, CIA super vectors being all right next door to each other. Is that at the time when this started, he was at the Brookings Intelligence Project. And what is he doing now? He just went right next door from here to here. He literally just walked next door, doing the same shit, working with the intelligence community to undermine Trump. And of course, what was his focus for 30 years at the CIA? Eurasia. The Blob's Seize Eurasia blueprint. Not to be outdone, his career interchanged between the CIA and State Department. Again, Eurasia, Eurasia, Eurasia. All of the worst blob monsters, Eurasia. That's what they killed Trump over. So they tried to assassinate him over. That's what they impeached him over. Nothing to do with grab him by the pussy. Hunter Biden said the N-word. Remember that on the voicemail to his lawyer? Or in the text to his lawyer and all that? But he's pro-seizing Eurasia. You know, when you're pro-seizing Eurasia, you can do anything you want. Grab them by the pussy. They'll let you do anything. You could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue if you're pro-seizing Eurasia. But if not, they will take you out or try to, like holy hell, and then they will come up with a retail version of why they did it. Oh, it's because he doesn't like women. Oh, because he's transphobic with this military. They don't give a fuck about that. But if it takes him out, mission accomplished. We'll say that was the reason. We'll declare a different cause of death. Okay. Well, I want to get so much deeper into this. That's crazy, but that's fine. All right. We should wrap.
This is Lucinda Williams. Welcome to Sessions at AOL.
Baby, see how I've been living. Velvet curtains on the windows too. Keep the bright and unforgiving light from shining through. Baby, I remember all the things we did when we slept together in the blue behind your eyelids, baby. Sweet baby, traced your sin through the gloom till I found these purple flowers. I was spin, I was soon smelling you for hours. Lavender, lotus blossoms too. Water the dirt flowers last for you, baby. Sweet baby. Tangerines and persimmons and sugar cane, grapes and honeydew melon on a fit for a plane. Lemon trees don't make a sound.
I'm just going to be reading the comments.
Bend and fruit falls to the ground, baby. Sweet baby. got out of the grind. Got my Mercury and drove out west. Pedal to the middle and my luck to the test, baby. Sweet baby, I've been trying to enjoy all the fruits of my labor. I've been crying for you, boy, but truth is my savior. Baby, sweet baby, if it's all the same, take the glory any day over the fame, baby. Sweet baby.
All right. Good night. Godspeed. I will see you on the internet.